because I know Paul's going to be bringing the Easter sermon, and I don't want to step on anything he has to say, but it is Easter Sunday, so we do have to mention the resurrection.
Yes.
You know, I began to study other things, and I think I studied for about 4 or 5 hours last night. And I had started off, I was studying a different subject, and right there in the back of my mind, it was just right there that, you know, this is Easter Sunday. How can you do something that's not about the resurrection? You know, how can you do something that has nothing to do with the resurrection on Easter Sunday? So I tried to come about the resurrection a different way, but still mentioning the resurrection. I'm going to go to Galatians chapter 2. And I'm going to start with verse 15. It says, "We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. But if while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves also are found sinners, who are therefore Christ the minister of sin? God forbid. For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I through the law am dead to the law, and might live unto God. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness comes by the law, then Christ is dead in vain."
It wouldn't have had to come, would it?
And I'm going to go through here and I'm going to talk about each of these verses. In verse 15, though we were born into sin, we were not born to be sinners.
No.
We were born to be followers of Christ.
God created all things good.
And you know, each and every one of us is born into sin. But that's not what we were born for. We wasn't born to stay in sin. We was born to be followers of Christ.
Free will is dangerous.
Verse 16, I'm going to read a different version. It's a lot easier to understand. It's from the New Century Version. It says, "Yet we know that a person is made right with God, not by following the law, but by trusting in Jesus Christ. So we too have put our faith in Jesus Christ, that we might be made right with God, because we trusted in Christ. It is not because we follow the law, because no one can be made right with God by following the law."
The law was not perfect.
You know, and in my mind, when I'm reading through this, I want to replace that word law with the word world. You know, we cannot live by the world or live of the world and be followers of God.
The world makes mistakes.
It's impossible, because the world doesn't care what God thinks.
Don't give a flip, mostly.
In verse 17 it says, But if while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves are also found sinners, is therefore Christ the minister of sin? God forbid. It's made clear that we are all sinners and we're all saved by grace. That doesn't mean that God encourages sin.
No.
Not one bit. It doesn't mean. And grace is not a license to sin.
Sin is painful.
You know, grace is not a license to sin. Verse 18 says, "For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor."
Don't go backwards.
I would be wrong to return to the things of my past and to teach that it is okay to do the things that I have given up. You know, we can't turn from our evil ways, but come back and say, well, it's probably okay to do that. You know, it's okay to do this. To teach that it's okay to go back and do the things that we have given up ourselves.
You can't return.
Verse 19 says, "For I through the law am dead to the law, that I might live unto God." If we are of the world, Paul done a sermon on this called The Walking Dead. If we are of the world, we are the walking dead. But if we live for God, we can die and be born again to live with Christ.
Amen.
So then we have chosen not to be the walking dead.
Our mind is renewed.
When we are of the world, basically the only thing you are is you're a walking dead person. You know, if you have not been born again, you are a walking
How
dead
can you have
person.
everlasting life?
Verse 20, "I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me, and the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me."
He covered you with his righteousness.
We have to die, just as Christ died.
Yes.
And when we are resurrected, we are changed
There's
because
more than
we
one
have
death.
Christ living in us. We must live by faith in God, who loved us and gave himself to save us.
He proved it, didn't he?
You know, we have to die of this world just like Jesus Christ did. We have to be crucified with Christ. We have to die so that we can be reborn. Verse 21, it says, "I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain.
No use.
Even though that we are saved by grace, we can't continue in the intentionally
Saved by
live
love.
like the world or continue in sin. If we could be saved by living in the world of sin, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ would have been unnecessary and useless.
Rudeness.
You know, if we could live the same life that we've always lived, then what would the purpose have been for Jesus Christ to give his life for us on the cross? What would the purpose have been? There wouldn't have been a purpose for it. It would have been useless. It would have been meaningless.
We're not very good.
And we cannot be saved in the world. We cannot be saved living like the world. I came across this story. It's actually a true story. I've never heard of this person before. And some people who are real smart in history probably has heard of this person before. But the person's name, he was a Jew. He was a chaplain, a Jewish chaplain. And his name was Rabbi Herschel. And I'm not for sure if I'm pronouncing his last name right or not. Scatcher, I believe is how you pronounce it.
That's Brother Tom.
Well, Patton's Third Army had just liberated Buchenwald. And 1 hour later, Rabbi Scatcher was the first Jewish chaplain to enter the concentration camp. There he saw horrible things, hundreds of starving men piled in bunks from floor to ceiling. And they said that actually what it was the bunks were small. They looked like bookshelves on the wall from the floor to the ceiling. And, you know, and I guess all of us laying in our beds now, sometimes it's hard for us to even sleep in the same bed with our spouse unless it's a king-size bed, you know. So you think about this, how much space did a person actually have in a bookshelf-sized shelf all the way up?
Lord, receive.
Though they had been freed, they remained in their bunks. After all those who now came and claimed to be liberators were in uniforms just as their captors had been for years, they suspected that new uniforms just meant new oppressions and new abuse, and they would not leave their barracks.
They were categorized.
Rabbi Scatcher spoke in their own language. He said, "Peace be unto you. You are freed."
Jesus Christ.
And at that point, they began to trickle out, a few at a time. And then the more that came, they just began to pour out of all these barracks that were there. The U.S. soldiers that were in uniforms and basically looked like the people that had been persecuting them. They didn't have the appearance of being any different than those who had been keeping them captive. But when the rabbi had spoken to them in their own language, they could tell that he was different. We can't continue to live like the world and look like the world. We have to be different.
Thank you, Jesus.
You know, we have to be different. We can't come to God and live just like we did in the world. When we give our heart and life to God and we die and we are crucified with Christ and we are resurrected, we have to be changed. We are new creatures. We have to be changed.
Amen.
We can't get people to come out if we look just like the people that helped them get them in the situation that they're in. You know, we can't, a drug addict, if another person that comes to them that looks like a drug addict and doesn't look like they have been changed, comes and invites them to church, are they going to go to church with them? Probably not, because they look just like the people that sold them drugs on the street. Or they look just like the person that persecuted them. Or they look just like the person that, like I said, had gotten them in the situation that they're already in.
Same old rodeo.
You have to change. There has to be a difference. You can't come to God and turn around and go right back out and be the same way that you were. You have to be born. You have to be resurrected as a new creature. And when you're resurrected as a new creature, there will be change. And there's going to be change. And I just thought that story was really interesting because, you know, soldiers wearing uniforms to somebody that's been persecuted by soldiers their whole life, all the soldiers, they look the same, you know. They can't tell the difference between that person and the person that had been persecuting them because they didn't know them. You know, they didn't know them. They didn't know who they were. They looked the same. All they saw was a gun and a uniform. And when that rabbi came in and talked to them, they heard a Jewish person, which was like them, because they were Jews and they were being persecuted because they were Jews. So they understood, they knew that he was different. And they knew that if he told them it was okay, then it was okay to come out because he was Jewish, you know. These people weren't persecuting him for being a Jew, so they knew things were going to be different.
Praise God.
I'm going to close with that.